Y'all, let's just start with give me your name and your brief 90-second history of dating, who you are currently dating, and we'll go from there. So your name, your brief history of dating, and then who you are currently dating. We can start with you, Marilyn.
Hi, I'm Marilyn. Hi, I'm a junior girls leader. I dated fun and casual most of high school and even most of college. I started following Jesus the summer before my senior year, which changed what dating looked like senior year and into college. And then at the end of college, I started dating my husband, John, and we've been married for 7.5 years.
And still dating. Y'all know John Tunger? That's her boyfriend. It's her boyfriend.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name's Christian. A brief dating summary of mine was essentially didn't really date at all. You know, I was just partying. That was more of what I did. But then, I met my wife, and then we started dating, and then we found Christ a few years into it, 2 years into it, and then that's when we really started walking faithfully and having a God-honoring relationship. And we've been married for 7 months now.
Newlyweds. So if you see their faces glowing, right, and they're just so in love, they're still newlyweds.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monique. So for me, in high school, I was casually dating, kind of serious relationships throughout college. But in the beginning of COVID, I felt like God was calling me, and that's when I met my husband now, and he brought me here to Three Crosses, and I just got baptized and we got married in last September. So now we are fully walking with Jesus.
I love it. Okay, so here's the deal, y'all. These are your questions that you asked on Wednesday night that through your small group leaders, a lot of them were texted to me, and we've taken those questions and written them all down and sent them to these three wise folks, and we're going to unpack what your questions are. So if you're sitting here and you go I wasn't here on Wednesday, these aren't my questions, please don't check out, because if you check out, you're only costing yourself, right? If you're in here and you are currently dating or you have any desire to date, whether it's this year or in 5 years, I cannot express enough. The Bible talks about the wise person as the person who's willing to learn from other people's mistakes and to listen to counsel, right? Every single one of us needs that, myself included. And the Bible calls the fool the person that just says, I got this, I don't need to listen to anyone. So if you're sitting in here and over the next 45 minutes or an hour, you're just sitting on your phone, or you have an AirPod in, or you're distracting the person to your left or to your right, or I would even say not taking notes, I would say you're only hurting yourself. I would highly encourage you to take notes with something. If you're I don't have anything to take notes on, I honestly think Edison has a couple of extra notebooks in the back. If you want to grab one of those and a piece of paper, a pen, rip out a piece of paper from that. These are your questions that there are answers for through the wisdom of this panel. And so I really wanted to just start out that way of going hey, don't miss the opportunity to glean wisdom on what is a dating relationship and how do we do this to the best of our ability. If you want to take notes, these gentlemen in the front that went, oh no, I can't take notes. If you put your hand up in the air, Edison he's like the note fairy, right? He's just coming to give you a notebook that you can take home. You can Venmo him 3 easy payments of $9.99 for the next 3 months for that notebook. Pure gold. What's about to be written inside of it, right? It's not the notebook itself, it's the contents of the notebook. You know what I'm saying? Okay, here we go. Panel, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Yay. Audience, are you ready? All right. We're going to start out with a doozy. And I think this is one of the more important questions that was talked about on Wednesday night, but then asked again on Wednesday. And so I really want to hit it this morning. But the question is, What if the other person in your dating relationship isn't really religious? And there was a follow-up question that was like, are we as Christians not allowed to date non-Christians? Like, what do we do with this dating somebody who isn't religious or doesn't have the same belief system as you? Is that okay? Is that not okay? Are we allowed? Are we not allowed? What would you guys say?
I can start. Okay. So the first thing I'll say is for everyone who was here on Wednesday, the duffel bag illustration was a really good one. Essentially is both the people in the relationship are holding a duffel bag with each other. And when somebody is holding somebody back, it can hold both people back. And the way I like looking at it is in the Bible it says to be equally yoked. And, growing up, I was like, what does yoked mean? Like egg yolk? I never really got it. So egg yolk was really a device that was tied, like a collar tied to 2 oxen. And then the oxen would basically would have like a burden that they would carry, like a plow, right? So when it says to be equally yoked, it's something to think of that when you have a partner and you guys are not going in the right direction, you guys are going to be pulled one of 2 either ways. It's going to be constant type of tension with somebody who maybe not be religious and pulling you one way, and then you trying to pull them, your way. And a couple questions just to think of, to consider this is that I had yesterday was, just to think of when you have somebody who's not religious is, would you want to bring your partner to church? That's just something to think of in the beginning. And then to kind of go more into that, like how would you feel if they didn't think God or heaven existed? Or, if they thought your relationship with Christ is cheesy. Those are all things to consider that, somebody who may not be religious can think of Christianity or, relationship with Jesus, I should say. So it's just something more to think of. It can be done, right? But there's going to be a kind of friction there with beliefs, right? Because this is our belief for eternity. And, they may not think the same. So I don't think there's a, clear yes or no, but I think those are things the Bible gives us to consider.
Yeah, I love that. When Austin sent me this question, I think we've been doing Sermon on the Mount in Big Church, and I kind of thought about the end of Sermon on the Mount, and additionally, like what you've been talking about with wisdom. Like, I think this question lies within that, like, am I allowed or not? The question is maybe more like, is this wise or not? Or I loved last week, if you were here for the panel, that like, how far is too far question got asked, and this one feels really similar to me. And Spencer had this great thing, like, is it something that's going to, what did he say? It was alliterated. It was 2 S words. Does anyone remember? Steal your affection for the Lord, or is it going to stir? Thank you. So I like
not the S word I was thinking of.
No.
I was thinking of sanctify. I'm just kidding.
Did
anybody else in here when you hear the S word, you don't
yeah,
think steal or stir?
This is
that
why
one's
you
on
don't
you,
give me a
Marilyn.
microphone.
That one's on you.
So I think this question falls in kind of that really similar realm. And I love just the pitting like the wise man and the fool against each other as a theme in Scripture. And I love how Jesus does it in Matthew chapter 7. We sing songs about this all the time. So if you don't know, this is where that comes from. Let me find it. Matthew chapter 7. Okay. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods come, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. And so I think, like, when you think about your dating relationships, and I think we'll talk about this more too, like, and all your relationships and all your decisions, like, you're building a foundation for your life right now, and you want to be sure you're building that on the rock of Jesus and, like, trusting him and desiring you, like, a closeness and intimacy with him first, because that's going to lay a foundation for the rest of your life. I think, like, even thinking about the analogies of storms, like, life is going to have storms for you, and, like, if I can urge you to value wisdom, like, please don't add storms upon yourself that are unnecessary. Like, they're going to come. Like, life is hard, And so, like, if I could urge you to prioritize and, like, value wisdom so you don't, like, add more storm on top of yourself, like, that would be a message.
Monique, do you want to add anything to that one? You don't have to, but if you want to.
Just to shortly add to, if you're unsure about the person you're dating, simply pray to God. Ask him what he wants you to do with this relationship. Pray for open ears, open eyes to what he wants you to do. Also, when you're dating another person, you could be struggling with something, and that person could have like advanced provision in it, so they could pull you to the right direction, or you could pull that other person in the right direction, like the duffel bag illustration.
Yeah, I think one of the things we would, as Omega, I could speak on behalf of all of Omega and our small group leaders and like the wisdom that is present here, is no one in this room would advise missionary dating. And what I mean by that is like, I'm dating this person that doesn't have the same belief system as me, but maybe through our dating relationship, this person will come to know Jesus. Again, is that possible? Sure. Right? Of course that's possible, and we've heard that story before. But I think it's like it's much more likely if you're dangling off a cliff, holding somebody off of that cliff. Is it more likely that you are going to pull that person back up onto solid ground, or that they're going to pull you off the cliff? Right? It's like, is it possible? Of course, right? But again, it's like wisdom would say, right, if you're getting pulled in that direction, it's like, well, I go to parties so that I can tell the people at the parties about Jesus. Maybe, right? Maybe you're that person that's showing up and like everybody's drinking and everybody's smoking weed and you're there and you're like, I'm here to be a witness for Jesus Christ. And it's like, maybe, but is it more likely that the entire room is going to impact you, or that you're going to impact the entire room? Right? It's like that's the difficult part of, it's like if you take a bucket of paint, a white bucket of paint, and you take black paint and you drop it in the white bucket, is it more likely that that's going to turn the entire bucket black, or that black is going to get absorbed by the white, or vice versa, right? You take a bucket of black paint, take a little bit of white paint, drop it in that. It's like, what's going to happen? So again, is it possible to date somebody who's not a follower of Jesus, and through that dating relationship, they come to church with you? You were saying, like, would you want to bring that person to church? Or, is it possible that that person's belief system is actually going to pull you away from Jesus? So, man, I love that. If you're taking notes, stir up versus steal. It's like, is this dating relationship stealing from your relationship with Jesus, or is it stirring your affection for Jesus? When I started dating Paige, one of the things I loved about Paige is that she had her own individual walk with Jesus, right? Homegirl on her own, had nothing to do with me, was just like in love with Jesus. And it made me want to love Jesus myself, right? It wasn't that like her and I together were following Jesus. It was like the two of us on our own time, pursuing Jesus. And like I looked at her and like the independence that she had. She's like, I don't need no man, right? I don't need a job. I don't need a career. I don't need any of these things, because like I love Jesus, and that is like my identity is firmly in that. And so I got to like merge alongside of her, and we got to build this life together that wasn't dependent on one another. And so that's where I would just say, like, man, if you're dating somebody that doesn't have the same like essential foundational belief system as you, it might work for a little bit, but I think down the road that deteriorates pretty quickly. It's like when you get married, what kind of marriage do you want to have? If you have kids, like, where do your kids go to church? Do they not go to church? Like, do you teach your kids biblical wisdom, or do you not? Like, what does this person ultimately value? And then if, man, at the end of the day, as followers of Jesus, we believe that there is eternity with God in a place called heaven, and eternity apart from God in a very real place called hell. So it's like, do you want to be married to somebody that is eternally destined somewhere different than you? Like, that's a wild thing to think through. So again, you might go like, well, I'm just having fun. That doesn't really matter. Like, I'm not getting married, which we're going to talk about next. But like, I would encourage you, if you're dating somebody who you would say like, well, they're not very religious, zoom out a little bit outside of just like today or this week and go like, what does wisdom encourage you to do? Is this stealing from the thing that is most valuable to you, allegedly, or is it stirring up the affections for Jesus? I want to talk about that like here in the moment versus like zooming out wisdom. I love this question that came up on Wednesday night. It says, people always say not to date in high school, which we said that on Wednesday night. Paige and I both said, like, our number one piece of advice, don't, right? But if you must, here's some best practices. Okay? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But the question is, people always say not to date in high school, but don't we learn from our mistakes? Isn't it better to get our mistakes out of the way earlier? I love this question.
Yeah. Do you want to start? Okay. So yeah, I think this is one that I can really relate with. So essentially, like I said, like a lot of my life before Christ was just like partying. I had empty relationships, and I kind of had like this epiphany of just like, man, you know, like I was reading the Bible, but I was still walking the line of like the world and trying to be a Christ follower. And like that's not fun at all, because you know like the consequences for what you're dealing with, and then you also can't experience the full joy that Christ has to offer. So then I kind of had a point of like, man, how will I find a wife with the life I'm living right now? You know, it's naive of me to think that I could be partying and you know, just like going all these different places, meeting all these different people, and find a wife suddenly. And I think that's when I really had the realization of, I read this book called Love, Sex, and Dating, right? Kind of like what we're talking about. And the key thing it talks about in there, it says, become the person you want to date. You don't meet someone new, you become someone new. And when we become someone new, that identity should be in Christ, right? And when we become someone new, we become someone better. And then I think that's just something, the question that you should be asking yourself is, right, a lot of dating is like finding the right person, right, in high school. Like, oh, I should just learn who I want to date and the kind of person I want to be with. But we never really consider of becoming the kind of person you are looking for. And I think the statement can be put is, become the kind of person the person you are looking for is looking for. And it could, to tie it into a verse right here is, when Jesus says, you know, we need to be the branch connected to the vine. And then from there we can produce good fruits. And that's in John 15:2. So it's something to take into consideration of how this process also takes a little while, right? Like fruit takes a while to grow. So, you know, your process to become attached to the vine can be slow, but you will become a better person, and you will become the person you're looking for is looking for.
Yeah, I think that idea of like learning from your mistakes is super interesting and very true, right? Like hopefully you do learn from your mistakes. I certainly have, and hopefully you do. And I think that's like in a big way, like, yes, God teaches us through our mistakes. Like that's what he's in the business of doing, of like redeeming and restoring and renewing our hearts and taking where we fail and like giving us grace. In Bible major, in the book of Romans somewhere, Paul's talking about like the gospel, and he's saying, you know, where sin has increased, grace abounds all the more. Like the more, like we sin, we can't out-sin the cross. Like God has all the grace in the world for us. But then he follows it and he says, but does that mean we just keep sinning because there's grace for us? And he's like, absolutely not. Like someone who's, why if you're free, would you enslave yourself again? You know, it's like like, don't you remember you were a sinner and Christ died for you and now you're free? You don't actually have to live the way of the world anymore. And so I think like in a wisdom conversation and in a do I learn from my mistakes, like absolutely, but that doesn't give you permission. It doesn't make it like strategic or smart or wise to purposefully make mistakes. And I would even warn you, you know, all in the book of Proverbs, it says that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. And when we talk about fear, we often talk about this like reverence for God as this like holy and perfect Father, which, yes, like we could talk about the fear of the Lord all day long, and we should have this like reverence for him. But there is also this fear in Romans, earlier in Romans in chapter 1, Paul also warns you that like eventually God will give you what you want. So if you're going out purposefully making mistakes because you want to do what you want to do and you actually don't really care that God thinks you should do something differently, eventually God's going to give you over to that. and you're going to be living life completely apart from him because you've chosen it for yourself. And so there is like and I don't want that to sound like scary or strong, like anytime you choose to repent and turn back to the Lord and confess your sins, he's there. Grace abounds all the more. But that doesn't give us permission. Like if you're using that as an excuse to continue making a mistake, like you're viewing it skewed, right? You're not seeing the forgiveness and the love that has been given to you rightly.
Right. I would just like double down. We don't live our life that way, right? It's like you don't live your life going, well, how am I supposed to know that I'm not supposed to murder people? I'll murder someone, go to jail, and learn from my mistakes. It's like, no. You look at other people who murder and go like, I'm not going to do that, right?
And
it's
even in relationships, right? Like you all know what you want to do or don't want to do in your relationships, likely based on what your parents did in their relationship.
100%. Like it is one of the greatest lessons you can possibly learn in life is the ability to watch other people do dumb things and make the decision to shift and say, I'm not going to do that dumb thing, right? Like that is the essence of wisdom. Is my guess is a part of the reason that you're here at church. Some of you, maybe your parents are forcing you to come here, which I would say, like, thank God you have parents that love you enough to force you to come to church. Like, what a beautiful thing, right? You're like, oh, my parents, why are they forcing me to come here? And it's like, your parents love you enough to go, we believe that the Bible and God is the absolute best thing for you. Like, hopefully your parents are also forcing you to not do cocaine, and they're, like, forcing you to not do heroin, and you're like, oh, they're forcing me to not do these hard drugs. It's like, yeah, maybe they're for you. Like, maybe they love you enough to set you up for success in life by, like, inviting you to do something that's actually the best thing for you. And I would just say, like, we don't live our life going, well, the only way I can learn is by making the mistake for myself. It's like, that's absolute garbage. That is not the only way that you can learn. And if that is, like, as long as you're living that way, the only way I can learn is if I make the mistake myself. It's like you're in for a world of pain and a world of discomfort and a world of suffering where, like, I really think you can pull yourself out of that by just going, hey, look at these people around me that love me enough to point me in the direction of wisdom. I think that's, like, such a big win for you in high school. Like, if you hear nothing else, if you make the pursuit of wisdom one of your main goals in life of, like, I'm just going to surround myself with people that love me enough to tell me hard truth, you will save yourself from making so many of the mistakes that I guarantee, like, the four of us sitting up here made. Monique, I want to come to you with this one. It's a follow-up question to what we were just talking about. But it's a two-part question. I'm just going to hit you with the first one. So you might be sitting here and go like, okay, so if I'm not supposed to date in high school, how do I know who I'm compatible with? Like, am I just supposed to one day trip and fall into this compatibility with the one person that I'm going to marry? If I'm not supposed to date, what do I do with this whole compatibility question?
If I think that you should be the person that who you want to date. So for me, I've dated a lot in high school. I've made a lot of mistakes in high school too, and I just think that it's really beautiful that you guys do have Omega to give you, like, an opportunity to, like, you know, learn about Jesus, and you have other people to support you in dating as well. So for me, sorry, I'm blinking out.
No. Yeah. So essentially, I think pointing back to wisdom with compatibility, you know, it's essentially like you don't need to learn the hard way. I think wisdom would teach us that the way we look at it in marriage is we look at relationships. We try to find people who have been married like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and we lean into those relationships as a base to compare ourselves for what a good marriage looks like. And I think that's something that you guys have in abundance here, right? Like, we've only been married for 6 months. You get 7 years? And then
5 years.
5 years. I mean, already here. Like, Edison, how long? 5. And all these, like, all of us here with marriages that you can look to and ask us, like, how we've been dating and what we learned from them. So I think there's just so much of not needing to learn the hard way. Why would you want to do that?
Yeah, I think Monique, I would even like double down on what you said. Like even like the small bit of what you said of like, I'm so thankful you have Omega. Like you're expressing like I didn't have something like that. And so a lot of your like search for compatibility was going like, I have this desire to be known. I have this desire to be loved. I have this desire to be accepted as who I am. And so I'm kind of looking for that in dating relationships. And it's like, I said this on Wednesday night. I've never met a married person in my life ever that looks back on their dating history and says like, I just wish I would have dated more people. Right? Like I wish I would have like test driven more cars to find which car was like the compatible one for me to drive. It's like, y'all, that's not how dating works. And like I have plenty of friends in my life that like dated one person and it was their spouse and they're married, and it's not like they're like, I just wish I would have dated like other people than just this one person. Like what a beautiful thing. I actually think like when I was in high school, the like quote unquote rebel was the person that was like dating a lot, or the person that was like hooking up, or the person that was like, you know, sneaking out of church to smoke weed in the bathroom. And I was like, whoa, that's the rebel. You know, like that person. And I look at it and I'm like, whoa, like it's a cool guy or cool girl, whatever. I now think it's the exact opposite. Like I think the most bad thing you could possibly do as a high school student, and I look at students like this, and I'm like, if you don't have sex before marriage, you're like rejecting pornography, and you're setting up things in your life where you're like, I'm gonna like stay accountable to these people. I'm gonna set up these filters on my phone, and like even if I do date, like I think it's the freaking coolest thing ever when two people are dating, and I find out that they're dating like 3 months later because they have like such awesome boundaries around their relationship that they're like, hey, when we're at church, I just hang out with the guys, I hang out with the girls. I'm like, that's so cool. Like I look at that person and go like, you're a rebel, like through and through, because you're rejecting what the world says is normal. And I go like, that's literally, it's the coolest thing ever. And it's so rare. People are like, oh, homeschool nerd, right? And you're like, no, I literally think it was the coolest thing ever if you can make it to marriage and be like, this is the first person, like I've saved myself for this person. Not like saving yourself for the sake of saving yourself. You're not some like vessel that's like, I now give myself to thee. It's like, it's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about this like pursuit of something so much bigger than yourself. Not this like settling for, well, I got to find out who's compatible for me, so I got to date all these people. It's like, no, you're an idiot. You're just trying to like justify what you want to do, which is the worst thing in the world. Like if we live with the compass of like, this is what I want to do, so I'm going to do it, you would be an awful human being if that was your compass. So like, I want to do it, therefore I'm going to do it. It's like we would have zero discipline in our life. We would be sexually promiscuous. Our bodies would be incredibly unhealthy, right? Like we would not be educated at all if we just lived a life going, whatever I want to do, I will do. It's like, what an awful compass for that. It's like, I think compatibility is not what we're after. It's like, let's pursue something bigger than us, find somebody who's doing that alongside of us, and like that's what makes dating such a beautiful thing. Let me follow up that question with like, if I'm not supposed to date in high school, part 2. Y'all are all sitting here. Anybody ever liked somebody before? Ooh, she catches your attention or he catches your attention, and then you ever find out that the person that you like also likes you? And then you're like, well, shoot, what do I do now, right? I'm in high school, I like her, she likes me, or I like him and he likes me. Like, where do I go from here? What do I do with this? Like, we like each other. We don't want to do anything dumb. We heard the panels talk about dating. Where do I go from here, wise panel?
I don't know if I have a great answer for this one, so Austin, correct me if you want.
I will.
I would say, like, be friends and have fun, and, like, hang out and have fun, and keep it light and fun. Like, light and fluffy is what you guys said on Wednesday. Like, by all means, like, make some fun memories, hang out, like, laugh a ton, flirt, like, have fun, and just keep it light. Like, try, like, to set a emotional boundary where you guys are like, clearly you do want to be wise, like you're asking the question. So my biggest piece of advice, and yeah, would be to keep it fun and light, and like you look back at it in years from now and likely you guys are broken up and it's like, no harm, no foul. We had a lot of fun, had some good memories, and we moved on.
There's room for nuance here.
Yeah, I think if two people like each other, it's okay to like be bold and tell them like, hey, I like you, you know? There is still boldness, like just because you can mutually like each other, you still got to be bold and like, you know, making a move, right? Like showing that you're interested. You can still have like the thrill of that in a healthy way, of two people mutually liking each other, right? Like, I mean, even with us, like one thing that was bold that I did with her, like when I, you know, was really we were moving our way towards Christ, was like, I was like bold to let her in into like this part of my life where Jesus was, that I never really shared with anybody. And that was like a bold step that I needed to do. So I think there's something in that, you know, of even being bold and like saying, hey, you know, I believe in Christ. Like, you know, that could be part of you liking each other, because that's, I hope, a big part of all of our lives, right? So I think it's just something to consider.
Monique, as you look back on high school, you said like I dated a lot. Me too. I'm guilty of that as well. As you look back on that, are there relationships that you go like, we liked each other, and so we like started dating, and then we became boyfriend and girlfriend? Like, would you look back on scenarios and go like, we moved too fast, and I look back and go, just because I liked somebody, that shouldn't have been my guiding principle. Does that make sense? Like, I liked them, they liked me, and so we started dating, and then we got physical, and then we, like, if you look back on that trajectory, I look back on that for me and go, man, just because we liked each other didn't mean we should have done what we did. Does that make sense? Like, what's your journey with that? Maybe you could like share a little bit of wisdom on that.
Yeah, so growing up, I never met my dad. I felt like I didn't have any relationships that I could look up to. My parents were divorced. I had a lot of divorce in my family, so I didn't have like a good foundation to look up to. So I had to fill my voids by, I thought at that time, was to date a guy, to make me feel loved, to make me feel affection. So I've dated a lot in high school. So in high school, we don't have any guidance, so we spent a lot of time alone, and that led one thing to another. And I felt like, you know, going back, I feel a lot of regret because I made a lot of mistakes in high school. I experienced an abortion as well in high school, you know, so I've had a lot of mistakes. You guys could come and talk to me about it one-on-one, but definitely looking back, having a lot of regret for that stuff. So I think now that you guys have all the support, it's a really good thing to take advantage of, to learn. And even coming up to one of us, I've experienced a lot in my life, so you guys can come up to me and ask me anything, and I'll share my wisdom with that.
One of the reasons I wanted the two of you sitting here is like, I've gotten to meet you guys and like hear more of your story. And one of the coolest things for me is like, even within the last year of like meeting Jesus and so much of your life shifting with that. You talked about like not having your dad, finding that identity in relationships. How has, like, maybe briefly, just take it aside from here, how has meeting Jesus, getting baptized, like making that the number one thing in your life, how has that changed that void for you?
Yeah, so even before I met Christian, I experienced a lot of depression. I felt like it was a consequence of my sins. So coming to Christ, like my whole life just did a whole 360. Like I would come to Three Crosses wanting to end my life. So, sorry, getting kind of emotional. So, you know, just my life with Christ now, like I don't have those emotions. I know that God gives me hope. The world is so beautiful. Like we just have so much to live for. So just walking in obedience with God, like, is just such a beautiful thing. And I just feel like so happy to be alive.
Yeah. That's so cool. I love that walking in obedience with God for you is not this like have to, it's this like beautiful get to.
Yes.
You know, and like if you're anything like me, if you're here and you've been around church for a long time, I think sometimes we view obedience or the Bible as like, ugh. I love Ryan in Big Church today said God is this like cosmic killjoy, that we're like trying to have fun in life, and then we're like, oh yeah, the rules. Sorry, God. And it's like you've experienced life completely outside of God and went like, I came to the end of myself, right? Like I made all these mistakes. I was wrestling with these things. And then you meet Jesus And obedience is this beautiful, like, no way. Like, I get to live in God's beautiful design for my life. And I think that's the coolest thing. You touched on this briefly, but I want to throw this out to the whole panel. If you look back on past relationships in this conversation that we've been having of like, if I can date whoever I want, like, why can't I just figure out if I'm compatible, or why can't I just have fun, whatever? How does past baggage from dating impact future dating relationships?
So, being in a marriage with Christian, I think I've had a lot of baggage up until I met him. Having baggage just causes you a delay in having a deep connection with God, and even in your relationship. So, for me, I've experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of bad experiences. For example, like, depression, having sex before marriage. So if you bring that baggage into a new relationship, I feel like you'll have like bad coping mechanisms, like controlling behavior, jealousy, comparison, having depression in a relationship. So you can ask God to gently reveal those burdens of your heart, and He can only give you your full satisfaction and His healing.
Yeah, so good. And maybe even a follow-up to this, like either one of you can answer that same question of like how do past relationships bring baggage? Like, what do you do with that baggage in your future relationships? But also, like, there was a follow-up question in here that I think you could both speak to is like, how do you slow down if you've already had sex before marriage, or if you've already crossed physical or emotional boundaries? Like, you might find yourself sitting here in this room going like, well, am I just screwed because I've already crossed that boundary in my dating relationship, or I've already had sex before marriage? Like, does this mean I'm just like done for and like baggage is going to follow me wherever I go? Like, so maybe it's a two-part question. Like, how does that baggage affect you? And then two, like, what do I do if I currently have that?
So I can definitely attest, kind of like with Mo, was the realization I had was, okay, I'm having all these empty relationships, and none of them are leading to anything fruitful or anything that I want to be lasting. So then when I meet Mo, I'm like, hey, I like her and I'm thinking of marriage. But when you pick up a certain habit, and especially like with how you date, of just like short dating and then moving on to the next person, it'd be naive of you to think I can date this way, and then all of a sudden flip the switch and now I am husband and wife material. There's something in your mind you have to carry of like, I want to carry myself as the person I'd want to be in marriage. And that was the flip of my switch moment. And I'd have to say that process was very hard for me. From going to just, seeing somebody for like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then just ghosting and not talking. And then all of a sudden I want to have a lifelong relationship with somebody after I've been doing, living in my ways for like 10 years, right? So I think that's the first half of, it's going to be hard if you think you can just flip the switch like that. And the second part to the question was?
Yeah, I think it's like, what I would hate for one of you to hear is you've had sex before marriage, or you've made a mistake, or you're currently, consistently engaging with pornography, or you are in a dating relationship that is inappropriate, and sit here and think like, well, I'm screwed, right? They're talking about like this baggage that I'm going to carry into my future relationships. And I think like one of the main tactics of our enemy, right? Like all throughout Scripture, we have a very real enemy, Satan, he wants to do everything he can to pull you away from Jesus. And a lot of that is shame-based, of you make a mistake and then you drown in your shame of, there is no hope for me. I am a terrible person. I'm not worthy of God's love. And it's like where the gospel comes in and says like, there is no place for shame. It is by grace you have been saved, right? So every single one of us in this room, whether you're currently making all of those mistakes or you're not, you don't deserve God's love. And yet he still comes in and goes, while you are my enemy, I will demonstrate that I'm for you and that I love you. And so I think all of us pause and go like, thanks be to God that he would save me in the midst of my brokenness. It's not like, well, I'll clean myself up and then I'll come to God. And so there's a part of that I want to hear from y'all of like, I think all three of you, I know you well enough to know like, there's all four of us would stand up here and go like, I made so many mistakes in the context of dating specifically. Thanks be to God that there was like grace for me in that. And so maybe speak to that, sitting with an audience going like, what do I do if I've already made those mistakes? Am I just screwed and I'm going to carry all this baggage into my next relationship? It's like a part of that is like, don't make those mistakes if you can't. But if you already have, what do I do with that?
Yeah. So with some context with me and Mo's dating, it was about 3 years before we started walking faithfully. Like we always knew God. So prior to our relationship with Christ and really pursuing that, we were like partying, doing drugs, sex before marriage, like fully in the world, right? And I think, we were embracing that and we were trying to find, pleasure in that, right? Like that's what it is, right? Like all the stupid things like that the world has. So I think it came to a mark really when, there's all this pressure that we feel on ourselves, without our relationship in Christ. Like we're trying to start things of like, when are we gonna buy a house? When are we gonna have a better job? And everything is focused like on our will. And I think like that was one of the things that we needed, and then also just like to lead to full surrender. And what we realized is, there was a flip and switch about like a year ago where we said, all right, we're both going to be obedient in our relationship with Christ. So we're going to stop when we start, with intimacy with each other. We're going to wait till marriage. We're going to stop going to parties. We're going to stop doing drugs, and then just try to walk faithfully. And it wasn't like out of I'm trying to follow rules, but it's because I want to live this life in abundance. And I think like my translation of Jesus saying that is like, I want y'all to live life at super max. Like I want you guys to live life abundantly, is what he says. And that means a life better than we can even envision ourselves for ourselves. And I think that's when we really started like understanding that God has something cut out for us better than we could imagine for ourselves. All the pressure of a better job or a better house, all of a sudden kind of like melt away. And the main thing I can think of, and Bible major, I'm gonna need your help. Bible majors, I think there's a verse where it says, God will take all the bad and use it for the good. And that's the story, it's redemption. Like God has redeemed our relationship from something that was, worldly and empty to something that's has been like one of the most fulfilling things. Now, like now we want to use like marriage to like bring light to people, bring light to our families that don't believe in Christ. Like there's been a complete switch in the way our relationship was just more for ourselves and for our pleasures. But now we want to bring the light of Christ to others with our marriage as the instrument of that. So, I mean, like if God can redeem, something as dark as we were in to something where we're trying to like lead our family to church or bring Christ on trips, like that is Jesus right there, is redemption.
Yeah, I think like you guys are that question of like, how do I slow down? Like you guys are a beautiful picture of having done that, right? So like if you're wondering, how do I slow down? I've told this person I love them. We've physically crossed boundaries, emotionally crossed boundaries. Like how do I pull that back? How do I slow down? One, like hopefully the person you're dating also loves Jesus and you guys can have a conversation like you guys did and feel that conviction and do something about it and choose from that point on to obey. And walk in freedom and life that Jesus offers. And so I love you guys as that, like, very obvious, clear picture. If you're dating someone who's not following Jesus, it's going to be a tougher conversation that they might not understand. So, like, go to the Lord in prayer, like, search the scriptures for wisdom, talk to your small group leader, like, get some advice on ultimately how to have a challenging conversation with the person that you're dating. That, truthfully, if they don't love the Lord, like, might lead to you breaking up with them. So like seek wisdom from Jesus and from adults in your life who love the Lord for like how to go about a conversation like that. And then as far as like past baggage and affecting your future relationships, like baggage is such a heavy term and word. So maybe even like a different way to frame it would be like, have you guys heard people say that like you are the sum total of like the 5 people you spend the most time with? And the idea behind that is that like we're constantly being formed, like we are becoming who we are based on our relationships. And so I think like practically when you're dating, your relationships are forming who you are, like what you prioritize, what you worry about. Really probably for a lot of young dating relationships, it's like where you're trust issues are gonna come from. Like, I dated very casually and fun for most of my life until John, and most of that was based because, like, the first person that I really cared about, it ended poorly, and I was like, I'm never letting anyone do that to me again. And so my, like, even desire for dating casually and fun was not because I wanted to, like, honor God. It was like, I do not want to, like, I built defense mechanisms, right, because of a relationship. And so, like, that then became a part of me. I had these defense mechanisms, and I carried that on. And so even as, like, I would say it actually, in my case, protected me. And so even when I was thinking about this question, I was like, ooh, like, in my marriage with John, like, yeah, my past relationships, it was more about who I was, not really about John's mistakes, or, like, it was like, no, these people just made me who I am, and so now all my issues I have are a result of my issues. But I was talking to some friends last night, and one of my friends is married to someone who had, like, maybe more mistakes in his past than she did, and she was like, oh, I'm way more impacted in my marriage by his mistakes, because I'm constantly wondering, do I measure up to who he was with before? Like, is he constantly comparing me to her? You know, it like breeds this, like, comparison game. So maybe those are, like, two practical examples of what it looks like to bring, like, who you are because of the decisions you've made into your future relationship. So I think, like, your decisions will impact you and who you are as an adult, and they're gonna impact your future spouse, because your spouse is gonna have to bear the weight of your poor decisions. And if you're both following Jesus, they'll, you know, I can speak as a married person, like, John and I do that for each other with grace and love, right? Like, I'm not, like, holding it against things that he's done, I'm not holding against him, and things that I'm done, he's not holding against me. We're both, like, following after Jesus, but there is, like, a very practical day-to-day element of it where, like, thoughts creep in or things come out of us that you just have, you got to deal with it.
Right? There's such a tension between, there is absolutely grace, right? Which grace is like this churchy term, but it's a gift that you don't deserve. So the gospel in and of itself, like, we are saved, it's this gift that we do not deserve. We did not earn that gift. And so when Marilyn's talking about having grace for John, or when I talk about having grace for Paige, it's like there are so many times where Paige gives me this gift of reminding me of who I am, remind me of who Jesus is, that, like, I don't deserve. And what I do deserve is her being mad at me, or her holding something over my head, or her holding a grudge. It's like, that's fair. Grace is not fair. And so even, like, to go back to the first question of, like, what do I do if I'm dating somebody who doesn't follow Jesus? I don't think there is an actual definition of grace outside of Jesus. I think it runs out. Like, left to us, I think grace runs out. And Jesus is the only deep well of grace that exists, like, period. And so I think without Jesus as a foundation, we can't have that. It's like, so it's a tension between have grace for each other, but also, like, sin has consequences. It's both and, you know? Like, I love your story because the two of you we stopped in our tracks, we were smoking weed, we were partying, we were having sex. Like, we did a period of living together. And then we realized, like, as we came to know Jesus together, it was like, God is inviting us into something that is so much better than any of this. Like, we're not going to live together anymore. We're going to stop smoking weed. We're going to make our life about Jesus. And then, like, the two of you falling in love with Jesus together is what makes your marriage have this awesome, firm foundation. Like, what a gift from God that is. And yet the consequences are, there's going to be things that you have to unpack in your marriage. For you, like, if you guys are sitting here going, I'm making some of these mistakes, I'm engaging with pornography, I'm having sex with my girlfriend or my boyfriend, or we're crossing physical or emotional boundaries, it's like, there is grace for where you find yourself, but also, friends, the decisions you're making now as a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old, whatever you are, will absolutely impact the 22-year-old you are, the 25-year-old you are, the future marriage you hope to have someday. Like, I had to sit with Paige and have a super uncomfortable conversation when we first started getting serious in our dating relationship about my past. And it's like, that's a very real consequence of sin. And so I would just say, like, if you hear nothing else, maybe you hear the girl you're dating right now or the guy you're dating right now, if they're not your spouse someday, they might be somebody else's spouse someday. It's like, that's interesting. That's an interesting thought to think through, right? Like, I look at the girls that I dated, and, like, I've met a couple of the guys that are now married to those girls, and I'm like, woof. I am the cause of some of her pain. I am some of the brokenness that exists in her life. That sucks. Like, that's a very real thing that I have to hold on to and that I have to live with. And it's like, there's no shame in that, but it's a real consequence of sin. It's a real consequence of brokenness. It's like if I look into another man's eyes and go, I hurt your wife when we were 16. That sucks. Like, that's a sucky thing to live with. And like, y'all now at 16, 17 years old, if you're dating someone, this is going to end in one of two ways. Either you're going to marry that someone, or you guys will break up. That's the reality. And so if you get married, awesome. Maybe you unpack some of that stuff in the context of your marriage. If you're 14, my guess is you're not going to marry that someone. If you're 16, my guess is you're not going to marry that someone. Right? So if you don't marry them, you will break up. And if you break up, are you proud of the way that you broke up? And are you proud of the way that you dated that person? Or is it possible that you're going to have to apologize to that person's future spouse someday? Right? Which probably isn't going to happen, right? You're probably not going to go to that spouse and be like, hey, I'm sorry for when we were 17. But the reality is you probably should, right? There's plenty of people in my life that I wish I could go back and be like, I was an idiot, right? And so now it's like a little bit of this is like, let us pay your dumb tax, right? Learn from some of these things. Write these things down and go like, I'm not going to live that way. I'm not going to pursue these things. I'm not going to make that my primary, okay? As we wrap up here, I just want to finish the same way we finished last Sunday. And just go, I'd love to hear from all three of you. You have a captive audience of about 60 people in the room. If you could go, hey, I'll leave you with this one thing, what would your one thing be? And before you get that, I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it. There were several questions from Wednesday night about marriage specifically, right? We've been talking a lot about like, hey, if the purpose of dating is marriage, right? The purpose of dating is not fun. It's not like the purpose of dating fundamentally is marriage. That's why dating exists. It's like I will date for the purpose of marriage. Then what is marriage? What is a healthy marriage, right? My guess is a lot of you in this room, just based on stats, don't have a healthy marriage to look up to. And so a lot of the questions that came from this dating panel were like, hey, what is marriage? What's the purpose of marriage? What's a biblical context for marriage? What I heard that as is like, man, these are two separate conversations. Like today I really wanted to focus on dating, but I do promise as your pastor, we will be talking about marriage, whether it's a future series or it's a panel that we do like this with people that have been married for even longer than like 5 and 7 years. Like I'd love to sit down with some people that have been married 30, 40 years and have them share wisdom with us as Omega. But so don't hear that as me going like, I just ignored those questions. It's like those questions are so serious that I want to tackle entirely different those questions specifically. So if you're sitting here going like, wait, my question about marriage didn't get answered, I promise you we will get there. So panel, if you could leave us with one thing, what would you leave us with?
I feel like this is the same thing we've been saying a lot, but it actually means a lot to me because I started coming to Omega my senior year of high school. So I got 1 year of Omega, new believer in Jesus, and Danny, the big church pastor, was our youth pastor. And I don't remember a single message he gave in Omega for my senior year except one. And it was an intro to a proverb series, and it was about valuing wisdom. And something clicked in my brain where I realized I didn't care about wisdom previously, and I needed to care about it. And so, honestly, I think for me, it was like probably, it was conviction of the Holy Spirit for sure, and it was also like I enjoy being smart. Like I enjoy people, like I like being smart, and wisdom was like an extension of that, right? It's like applied smartness. Like how do you apply your intelligence to life? And when I like turn that on, kind of like Austin will say too, like when you can humble yourself and seek wisdom, like look for it, ask for it, figure it out, your whole life will be transformed for the better. And value wisdom. That's my one thing.
Yeah. To tie into it's wisdom right here, and I think the one thing I would say that kind of wraps up what I'm thinking is, the difference between a mature person and an immature person, or you could say like between a boy and a man or a girl and a woman, is someone who's immature just thinks short term, and someone who is more mature will think long term. And I think that's something that you need to consider, especially in dating right now, is think about long term. Like I love how Austin said, think about like the 22, 24, 30-year-old self. and how your decisions right now will affect your future. You know, it's a law, like it's gonna happen. So there, you can be a 15-year-old man in here, a 15-year-old woman in here with the way you carry yourself. And on the flip side of that, there's some 30-year-old boys and girls out there who are still immature. So y'all can flip the switch and still start looking long-term and think of the way of the future and something that you'll be proud of.
So for me, I just feel like dating for purpose, not for potential, and just like learning from my mistakes, just like going into my life now where I just want to be like full on surrendering my life to Jesus, and that's like for like building community, just having friends that you can share that with. Going to Omega is a really good opportunity to learn more about Jesus, and coming to us if you need anything. And also for me and Christian, we have a lot of friends and family that we want to plant seeds about God with. So just using our marriage as an example, as our story, sharing our story with you guys.
So good. I think if I could add one thing, I would say anything worth doing in life is difficult, right? Like I was listening to a podcast yesterday that was talking about this term durable hope. I was like, whoa. Thinking about the term durable, like the only people in life that are durable are people that have suffered. And it's like, even like the athlete, it's like if you're going to make it in the fourth quarter, or if you're going to make it in the second half or the ninth inning or whatever it is, it's like the only way to have that durability or that resiliency is if you've suffered in practice. It's like you run sprints, you suffer in sprints so that you can be durable in the game. It's like if you're a musician, you suffer in the practice and you get the blisters on your fingers, and you like the greatest musicians of all time are the people that have suffered and now they're durable in their craft. And relationships are the same thing. It's like if you want to have a durable marriage, I don't think there's a single one of you in this room that says like, I'll probably get divorced in here today, and like I'm just okay with that. It's like, no, reject that. Like if you come from a divorced family, break the cycle. Right? If you want to be married someday and you want to have a durable marriage, and y'all, let me tell you, I've been married for 5 years. Marriage is the best thing, but it is also very hard. It's like inviting somebody into every moment of every day of your life is extremely difficult. And it's amazing, and it's joy-filled, and I love Paige. She is genuinely my best friend in the universe. Like there's no one else I would rather do life with, but it's difficult. And if you want to have a durable marriage, like what you're doing now to put that work in matters a ton. I love what you said of like becoming the type of person that you want to be, that you want to be with. It's like put in the hard work, be a durable person. Anything worth doing in life is hard. It's difficult. Suffer well. Like if you like someone, they like you, and you can't date, awesome. Suffer well, right? It's like, I know that sounds ridiculous of like, I'm just going to lean into difficult things in life. But like, if you don't lean into difficult things in life, you're just going to be this like passive, take the easy way out. For what? You will make zero impact on this world. It's like you're just going to live in your own little like cocoon. For what, right? It's like, listen to wisdom. Absolutely, holy cow. Anything worth doing in life is difficult. Hey, we love y'all. Like, panel, thank you guys for sharing your wisdom. Y'all, thank you for sitting and listening and engaging with this.